Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, it's a sign. I was watching different things today, reading a couple different articles when I got home after doing some praying, because it's something I've gotten into a habit of doing, especially over the last year. And one of the things I read, several of the things I read, kept having this same reoccurring theme. And it's a theme that I actually kind of love because I own some of these battle rifles. Now, what is a battle rifle? Basically, it is anything .308 caliber, 30-06, 270, semi-automatic. This is what I would class it as. Military pattern, like the M14, the M1 Garand. Usually they're one of those full-powered rifle cartridges. Now, why is this a big deal for me? You know, my dad always, we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. And my dad didn't have a larger rifle collection or gun collection until I was older. And he collected them over years. But he was always trying to find a rifle that was kind of dual purpose. And most of us nowadays would say, well, that's the AR-15. The AR-15 can be used for just about anything you need it to do. Until you start looking at things like elk or Rocky Mountain mule deer or possibly bear hunting or possibly moose, now that we're starting to see them in the Southwest again. Holy moly. If you didn't know, we've had 2 or 3 moose come to northwest New Mexico, and that hasn't happened since, the 1800s. So that's an interesting thing that they may be getting their populations may have recovered enough to where we one day may be able to hunt them again in New Mexico. But when you look at a big-bodied animal like that, you realize that the 223 or the 5.56 is not going to do it. And the 7.62 by 39 is not going to do it. But wait, I've heard of dudes shooting elephants with 7.62 by 39s, and they seem to do okay. Well, shot placement does matter. But what I'm talking about is the general kinetics of what it'll do, what the bullet will do. And that translates to other capabilities. For instance, you don't see very many DMRs using 223s or 5.56s. They can do it. They do use it. There are rifles specifically designed for it. But in general, most DMRs usually are M14s or AR-10 style rifles like the Knights Armament or the HK-110, I think is what it was, that the military had gotten a hold of for the designated marksman. The reason why they did that is because they're standardized on the pattern of magazine more so than anything else. But where this hits home for me is my dad always wanted an M14. He never got one. I got one for a little while. I wasn't very enthused with it, especially after Springfield started backing things that I wasn't cool with. And after having my experience with Springfield pistols, I decided I was a Glock boy anyway. So I got rid of my Springfield M14 or, its civilian counterpart, which is the M1A. I was searching for the word. I started using roller delayed guns. So I like the HK style guns. They are hard on brass. You can polish them up. You can reload them. I've got the reloads to prove it. It takes a little bit of time, and it depends on the vintage of that HK style rifle. And why I'm saying that is they flute the chambers of them so that the brass extracts easier, and that usually leaves black marks on it. And some of them with really deep cuts in the chamber for that fluting, it'll actually cause the brass to have lines in the brass. That's not ideal for reloading. Plus, they chuck them like 13 yards. I was going to say 3 feet, and I was like, no, that's not wrong. They literally chuck them about 13 yards away from where you're shooting. So it's not an ideal thing to go hunt for brass with these either. So I am just a fan of it, though. I have 2 PTR 91s. I've stretched the legs out of them. I'm a dramatic fan of my PTRs. I've done a lot with them. I've trained with them. I've taken rifle classes with them. The one thing you notice with something like that, though, is the loadout is dramatically different. Even if you can stomach carrying 17 magazines of 20 rounds of 308 per mag, that is not something that's light. You've doubled or tripled the weight of your carry. So you're not going to carry as much ammunition, nor should you need to, because the rifle is going to give you more capabilities with range. It's also going to give you more capabilities being barrier blind if you had to defend your home. So if you were having to shoot through a car door or a car, mind you that cover for a car or a concealment is what it's more apt for, unless you're behind the engine or the rear wheel axle. That's the only thing that's going to stop a bullet. Even AR-15s will go through cars mostly because it's just an aluminum shell or a plastic shell for a lot of modern cars. This is stuff that my daddy taught me. This is that boomer wife, mythology that I stick to some. And with me, boomer mythology is still a thing. I still have to counter myself time and time again when I have incorrect knowledge that my dad passed down to me, but it's stuck because it was my dad and it'd been years passed down from gun counter knowledge without really having any practical experience with it. That's changed. I shoot a 308 a lot. I have multiple 308 rifles, some of them those battle rifles designs. Most of them are kind of bolt action rifles, and they're made for hunting, and I absolutely love those also. I absolutely love my hunting rifles also, but I prefer the self-loading rifles, and I have proofs in the pudding. I've carried it elk hunting, deer hunting, my PTR 91. I have one that's set up to be a designated marksman's rifle with a bipod and the whole 9 yards. It would be one of those rifles I'd have to really, really consider not just taking it and having to leave. If I was going to have to pick one rifle, that may be it, just because of its accuracy. Because if you're going to have to, bet the farm or your life on your skill with a rifle, that is the one rifle I can always consistently make sure that I hit exactly where I want to, up to like 550 yards. And that's why I took it elk hunting. I've taken it deer hunting. The last few years my dad was alive, the couple of hunts we got to go on, I took it deer hunting and elk hunting. And my dad was like, that's my son. He's watched me carry an M1 Garand, his M1 Garand. He let me carry it 1 year deer hunting, and I carried it the whole time. I'm not a hoss, I'm a big guy, but carrying something like this, you definitely learn why you want to have an AR-15. If you're in the backcountry of New Mexico or Colorado, it is not something that you take lightly. There's a lot of hunting, a lot of hiking specifically involved when you're hunting in the backcountry, unless you're a road hunter. And you're not supposed to hunt from the road in New Mexico, but there's a lot of people that do. I like the capability, and between it or my 270, if I'm going to hunt, I'm going to take one of the two rifles, and I usually take them both. And the reason why is stuff happens in the field. You can fall, because I have fallen, and you're not sure of the rifle, and you don't want to shoot to check right away. So you pick up your next rifle, your backup, and you go to work. That's why I have two PTRs. The story behind that's a little funnier, though, and you could tell I love them because this is how this happened. My good friend that I've mentioned on this podcast before, he had had a PTR because he listened to me and decided he was going to buy one, and it was going to be cool for him, and we'd be able to swap mags the whole bit, because we kind of deal in those realms of, if the ball does drop, being able to support your buddy's gun is just as good as supporting your gun. And if you only have one magazine type, you can swap them in a firefight if you ever got into that situation, because guys think like that sometimes. So he bought one, and it immediately started malfunctioning. Now, if you're a roller delay guy like I am, you know that there's a couple things you need to check with it. Bolt gap, that's part of how you check the head spacing on them. That's usually the first thing I check. I have a set of feeler gauges for that. And mind you, the AR-10 is light years ahead of service and maintenance than anything like the PTR roller design, HK type stuff, because it was made with a better design in general. Okay, so you don't have to do things like carry field gauges or feeler gauges with you to service your gun. I do for my PTRs. Now, the other thing is what was happening with this turned out was that the extractor was milled wrong from the factory because it was a brand new rifle when he had it, and I replaced it with an HK extractor and an HK pin, because that's the second one that usually breaks on the roller delay guns. Is the pins aren't that great that hold the extractor in. It's a spring and a pin, and I got it running. And I went to hand it back to him, and he's like, man, I think I'm going to sell this gun. I said, don't sell it. I had a 20-inch AR-15 that I had made. It had the carry handle sights. I had basically turned it into kind of like a Desert Storm-ish type gun because it had a quad rail. It was very accurate. I got it in another swap with another friend, but Dexton, that's my friend that I'm talking about, he is a huge fan of the AR-15, so I swapped. We traded. Now, this was before any of the stupid gun laws that came out and said you had to go do a background check beforehand, and it wouldn't have mattered anyway. He's my brother in all ways but blood. So we swapped rifles, and I've never looked back. I have two AR-15s. My kids have AR-15s, except for my oldest son, who has a Kalashnikov. Now, the AR-15 is in my family because my brother has one, and I told you the story of why I wanted to originally make one. But that isn't my chosen rifle. It's still a Kalashnikov, even though I have the two ARs. It really is becoming more and more my battle rifles are. And it's because of what I know I can do with them. You know, if things go that bad that I have to leave my home, there's a potential I'm going to have to fall an animal to feed myself or whoever I'm with. And can I do it with an AR-15? Absolutely. Can I do it with a Kalashnikov? Absolutely. Can I do it easier with a 308? Oh, hell yeah. Time and time again. I've put food on the table for myself right now with 308s. My brother put down his last elk with a 308. You know, it is one of what Dad used to call God's caliber. So these type of rifles have always been in my family. We've always wanted them and didn't get them. It wasn't until myself and my brothers got older that we started really pursuing them, because that was kind of something we had to add to our collection because it's something Dad always wanted. But it's also because we saw the utility of it. You know, it's not the same type of rifle that an AR-15 is. It operates similarly, and there's a lot of misnomers around it saying that they're, assault rifles and that they're used in all kinds of bad ways. But when have you ever seen a gangbanger carry a FAL or a G3 or even an M14? They're too expensive, and usually those people that have them usually have them under lock and key, and nobody can touch them because they're such rare oddities anyway, and they're becoming increasingly popular. And I think the reason why they're becoming increasingly popular is because people are seeing the utilitarianism of this caliber. You know, you can hunt with it. You can defend your family with it. If you're only allowed to have one rifle, this may be the one for you because you can do everything you need to. That said, it is not ideal for inside work. If you had to clear a house, can you do it with a battle rifle? Yes. I've done it. It's not fun. It sucks. And I would much prefer my AR-15 for that type of work, or even my Kalashnikov. because they're shorter, they're handier, they're lighter, and they allow you to do a little bit more flexibility stuff. They also don't have the problem of over-penetration. A battle rifle is going to over-penetrate because of the nature of the cartridge, which means that if you're using it in a home defense type situation, you do have to worry about little Susie down the street or little Johnny down the street and where the bullet goes after you squeeze the trigger, just like you always would. But the AR-15 is more likely, the 5.56 specifically, is more likely to hit your exterior wall, deflect, or maybe hit your neighbor's exterior wall, and that's the end of it, especially with the right round. And you can cater .308 rounds for that too. But then you start sacrificing performance if you did have to bug out. So could you change ammunition? Absolutely. And that's something else that's a draw for the battle rifle, is you can have specialty sniper rounds, like rounds that are tailored for extreme long range. And then you can have normal training rounds that will have way more capability than the 5.56 does or the Kalashnikov round, but they're not as tuned for performance of the rifle. So you can do work with them, but they're not as potent or as accurate. And that is something that I've done. You know, that's one of the draws for it. The draw for that particular style rifle, the PTR, was twofold. One, that there's enough of them in circulation, the PTR 91, the HK series rifles, that parts are plentiful. You can buy roller kits, you can buy firing pins, you can buy locking pieces, you can buy extractors, those pins I was just talking about, wear items for this particular form factor of gun, and carry them on your person if you need to. Okay, that's a requirement for this type of rifle for me. Can you do it with an M14? Absolutely. Can you do it with an AR-10? Absolutely. The AR-10, you're probably going to have even smaller selection of parts you're going to have to carry for maintenance. If you get a Kalashnikov in a .308 or a 7.62 by 54R, same thing goes there. You're going to have a smaller selection of parts you're going to need to carry for this type of thing. Problem is, what about the caliber? You know, the AR-10, you're pretty set with the .308 or the 7.62 by 51 because that's an American caliber. It's American hunting caliber. It's pretty popular in the United States. 7.62 by 54R, you're kind of limited to what selection you can get. And that's where I kind of like sticking to quote-unquote NATO standards. Even though I live in the West and I live in the United States and I have access to everything, if the world's unwinding, the .308 would be one of those calibers you could probably find a lot easier than you can to find like a 6.5 or a 7.62 by 54R. And that's what I'm banking on. You know, I have enough rounds to service what I need for as long as I think I can possibly go. And that's dependent on getting in those firefights, because the ideal situation is you're never in a firefight, because you're not going to always win a firefight. And that is kind of a given. You're not always going to be able to plan when you're going to get into a firefight either. So those things come into play when I start thinking about preps and when I think about battle rifles. And, you know, I have those conversations like in my head, like every other man does, I think, that's in the 2A world, that if there was one rifle, if Western society dissolved tomorrow and the Civil War, the Boog, whatever, kicked off, what was the one gun you're going to grab to go if you had to leave your home? And the truth is, the more I like to fool myself into thinking I'm probably going to grab one of my AR-15s, or I'm going to grab the 5.56 Kalashnikov, in my heart of hearts, I know it's going to be a .308. And it's because of its capabilities. You know, it will always put me behind a firepower curve, because I'm never going to have as many rounds as my opposition possibly could have. But my rounds should be a hell of a lot more effective because I'm more effective with that particular caliber. And that is where I bank on some things. You know, magazines for this. When I bought my magazines, I was getting brand new military surplus magazines from the German army that were just put on the market for $3.25 a mag. Sometimes I could get them for $1.25 because I could buy them in lots. So I have a lot of these magazines. If one of them ever fails, I have pieces, parts to rebuild it, or I can just discard it and use another one. And since I have 2 of these rifles, and my friends, a couple of them have similar rifles. They have Setme's because it was cheaper for a while there when Century was making them. And if you knew someone like me who could fix it, because that's what most of them had a problem with, head spacing, and you could fix it if you knew what you were doing to some degree. Some of them were so messed up you couldn't fix. But in these cases, I was able to fix their Setme's, get their headspace right, get them timed right so that they ran like they were supposed to, and that is a big deal. You know, the other thing I'll tell you about the HK style rifle is the trigger pull's heavy as hell. I've done some trigger work on mine, and it's still not a factory, AR trigger even. It is heavier. Coming from the Mauser world, though, and the military delayed style or the 2-stage style trigger, I'm kind of used to it anyway. Can I get multiple shots off in a string, though, and hit my target? Absolutely, because I can ride the reset on that rifle very well. That goes back to capability, All this is because I was inspired by reading a few articles and seeing Rob Ski at Vintage Rifle Shooters, because I follow Rob Ski there in AKOU. And I think I saw another video by Ian who was talking about the actual definition of a battle rifle. But I actually see a lot of utility in a battle rifle. The M14 or the M1A, I have known people that have killed elk, deer, bear. That's their only rifle. Do I have a problem with it? No. It's actually a good rifle. It's built off the M1 style action. It's going to work forever. Is it as resilient towards weather and mud and grime? Probably not. Is my PTR? A little bit. I'd say if you watch the mud test videos, you've seen that the PTR or the HK style rifle does okay. It's not optimal, and the AR-10 probably would do better. But I don't know that I've ever seen a mud test on one of those. And nor do I really care, because those are extreme situations. I actually care more so about its functionality and my personal experience with this particular platform. And next to the Kalashnikov, I would say this is probably the one I've spent the most time learning to perfect the best. The AR-15 kind of bored me. I got used to it really quick. For all the press that people say it takes a lot of training to figure out the AR-15, it doesn't. Keeping it operating and maintained, I don't think that's very much either. There's a reason why that is. It's because there's a lot of training that has come out from the military that has trickled down to us civilians. And the same thing can be said about these battle rifles. Those guys in the late 70s and early 80s, they'll tell you some stories about these, and they can tell you how and when to use them. So, if you're looking for a new rifle, and you're looking for a rifle because you only want a rifle to do multiple things, consider a battle rifle. But also understand there's no free lunch, and you're sacrificing one thing for another. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.